Karen, thank you for joining us today.
Good morning, and it is an absolute pleasure to be here. It really is, and thank you for inviting me to have that conversation and to have the talk with everyone. So thank you everyone for joining on a rainy Friday morning, depending on where you are. So as you've heard, my name's Karen Blackett, and my day job is running WPP in the UK, so the president of WPP in the UK, but I do a range of other things outside of my day job. So I am a non-executive director for Diageo, which is a drinks company and a FTSE 100 top 5 company. I am also Chancellor of my old university, which is the University of Portsmouth, and have been for 6 years. I'm also a non-executive director for an organisation called Creative UK, which used to be called Creative England, which is about looking at the creative industries in the UK. So everything from advertising through to dance, through to music, through to theatre. It's all the range of different organisations in the creative industries, and it's about trying to get the conditions that we need for the industry to grow, but also investing in creative companies as well. And I am a mum to a almost 14-year-old boy who knows a lot about Windrush because I do make sure that he knows about our heritage and knows about where we came from. So if we go on to the next slide, my mum and dad, they came to the UK when they were both 19 in 1961. So they weren't the first generation of the Windrush migrants to the UK, but they came a little bit later. So you had 40s, 50s, 60s and 70s, which is when you saw most people from Caribbean islands arrive in the UK. So my mum and dad came over separately when they were 19, and my granddad on my mum's side had arrived in the 50s. And my granddad had moved to Reading and he worked as a tailor. So he was a cutter for Burberry, so the fashion brand, and he had settled in Reading. And my mum came over and she trained as a nurse. So she trained in London as a nurse. And then when she'd qualified, she moved to Reading and worked at the Royal Berkshire Hospital in Reading for about 35 years. My dad came over with his cousin, Shirley, and they sort of were in London. He worked on the buses as a bus conductor for about a year before he got an apprenticeship with what is now known as BT and was an electrical engineer with BT. And my mum and dad had been to school together in Barbados, and Barbados, for those of you that don't know, it's a tiny island which is about 26 miles long, 14 miles wide, or if you're a local you say a smile wide in Barbados, and it's an island of about now 280,000 people. So my dad and Shirley came over, my mum came over and trained, and then they met again in Reading. And so they started dating, and then myself and my sister arrived. So I've got a strong tie with Barbados because we still have a lot of family in Barbados. So my dad's brothers left Barbados rather than coming to the UK. One went to America, one went to Canada. My mum's sisters remained in Barbados, and we've got strong ties to the island because we know so many people there. And I think it was always a dream for that generation that they would come to the UK to earn their money, to really try and then make sure that they could look after the family back home in Barbados. But also there was this real obsession about buying land back home, so earning the money to buy land back home. So my dad had a plot of land which he had, and my granddad had various plots of land as well. So when they were earning their money, they were saving, giving some back to Barbados and the family, but also making sure that they invested and bought lands that they could eventually build houses and at some point moved back to Barbados. Now, my mum and dad didn't move back. My dad unfortunately died quite young, so he didn't have the opportunity to move back. And my mum said that she'd been here in the UK longer than she had in Barbados, because she came when she was 19, so remained in the UK, but still have that strong ties. So I define myself as British Barbadian, because I do have that dual nationality in terms of the association with both the UK, which is home, but also I call Barbados home as well. So my childhood was full of people who came from the Caribbean, bringing the food with them. So anyone that went home used to come back with flying fish packed in their suitcases for us all to have, with hot pepper sauce, with all the things that you could get, but it was more difficult to get here. So there was lots of people when they were going back and forth to the Caribbean, bringing back the food that I associated with home and with my grandparents. And this is a well-known fact as well. Reading is known as mini Barbados, because there were so many people from Barbados that sort of descended and landed in Reading in the 60s. Next slide. So my mum and dad coming to the UK, and coming when they were still effectively teenagers, they had to navigate a totally new system, and one which was so different to what they knew. I remember my mum telling me when she came over that she used to add sugar to her milk, because it was really commonplace back in Barbados that they'd have tea or coffee, but they'd make the tea or coffee, they'd add condensed milk. So everything was very sweet. And I remember my mum saying, coming here to the UK, everything really wasn't. So she'd add sugar to everything here. And they had to navigate a totally new world that they knew very little about. My mum had her dad here, so my granddad here, but other than that, it was everyone that came together trying to help each other to find their way. And my mum and dad had myself and my sister, so I'm the youngest of two. My sister's 3 years older, and I think, like most first generation West Indian immigrants to the UK, apologies, I've got two dogs, and I thought this might happen. My two dogs are Bob Marley and Missy Elliott, and there's a dog somewhere down the street barking, and my dog's deciding to have a chat with them. So apologies, I hope you can still hear. But as I say, my mum and dad were sort of trying to navigate this new sort of system, and they didn't really know anyone other than the people that had come over and landed with them, and who were also new, trying to sort of navigate and understand how everything worked. And there are many, many sayings, which I think are Caribbean sayings, which passed on to myself and my sister, and I actually passed them on to my son as well. So my dad, even though, you know, he's this first generation West Indian man, was actually a massive feminist. He really was, because he had two daughters. He wanted to make sure that we would be okay in a country that he was not yet familiar with. So he was very focused on making sure that we could be independent and confident. And so he used to tell us, you've got 2 ears, 1 mouth, use them in that proportion. So really listen, really listen and learn before you decide to speak up. And I was at a memorial service for Stephen Lawrence earlier in the year, and Stuart Lawrence, Stephen's younger brother, was giving an oration, and he said, my mum used to say to me, 2 ears, 1 mouth, and my son, who was with me, turned and looked at me. So I think it is a Caribbean phrase which is said, which is really about trying to really listen and learn. And what was really interesting with my mum and dad, they talked a lot about, look, just get comfortable being memorable, because they talked a lot about how you're probably going to be one of the only girls in a room. Whether that was a classroom, or whether that was university, or whether that was a meeting room at work, you're probably going to be one of the only girls in a room if there are more than one. and you're definitely going to be the only black person in the room. So there is no point trying to blend. So my mum and dad didn't talk about integration in terms of blending in. They talked about get comfortable being memorable because you're going to stand out. They absolutely get along with everyone. Literally, you've got to get along with everyone to get ahead, but you can't blend. You're going to stand out because you're going to be a woman, you're going to be black, and actually some of the environments you'll be in, you'll be seen as different. And so I had a very strong foundation from my mum and dad, which was about celebrating my difference, not shying away from it or being worried about it. And so that strong foundation of confidence helped me because I was brought up to believe that actually my uniqueness was actually a positive because I have different thought patterns, I have different life experiences, see it as a positive. Like most West Indian families, education was really important. So making sure that we had that foundation of education that my mum and dad did not have back in Barbados, and making sure that we were able to go to university. And my sister and myself were the first in our family to go to university. So that was really important for them. But that core thing about celebrating difference was really important. And working really hard. Again, a phrase which is so often heard, you have to work twice as hard to get half as much, because they were very conscious about lack of equality in the UK because of what they had experienced. It was hard for them. My mum was a nurse. She was often, you know, told that a patient didn't want to be treated by a black nurse and not being allowed to treat them, even though she was trying to care for them and help them. And my dad, especially when he was on the buses, they didn't talk about it much, but he faced racism. His cousin Shirley would talk about it more, you know, with how people would talk to them. So despite that, my mum and dad were like, look, just celebrate who you are, which was really, really important. And look, one of the things that I think definitely came from the Caribbean and my mum and dad was this love of sport. I absolutely loved cricket because it was, you know, I'd remember when there was a test match on and the West Indies were playing, my dad would be glued to the cricket and I'd have the cricket theme tune in my head. And I loved sport. And again, having the opportunities that my mum and dad didn't have in Barbados, in the UK, was really important. So my mum was a really fast runner. She was really, really fast. And I think myself and my sister have that gene. Next slide. And so I actually did a lot of athletics training when I was younger. And actually that's helped me in my working life because the ability to focus, to really focus on the task ahead, the ability to practice, because I practice what I do, and I was a long jumper and a sprinter, so I practice and practice and practice my takeoff, I practice my start. And again, what I have learned from my parents was that feedback's a gift. Feedback's about trying to make you better. Not everybody delivers feedback in the right way, but it should be seen as positive intent. So I am open to feedback. So I am competitive, and I think that's helped me in my career, but I compete with people outside the four walls that I'm in. So I am competitive. I believe in terms of teamwork, and I am really open to feedback because that is about me improving and getting better. So my dad used to be at the end of the long jump pitch with a camera. There weren't mobile phones in those days, so you couldn't take a picture straight away. So he'd be there with a camera, you'd then have to wait and get all of your film sent off and wait for it to come back. But my dad would have pictures of myself and my sister. My sister was a hurdler, and we'd be looking at the pictures and studying the pictures to see how I was taking off. Was it a good landing? Was my lead leg good? So I'm open to feedback because that's about me getting better. And look, the core thing with my mum and dad was about making sure that A, we got an education, B, that we were happy, making sure that we didn't shy away from who we were and that we were proud of who we were and where we came from. And my dad would always say, if we go on to the next slide, he'd say, look, you've got to learn. So learn your craft, whatever it is, learn at school, you've got to learn, then you've got to earn. So make sure that you're able and you have the best possible run of being able to earn a living and a good living so that you can look after yourself. So again, my mum and dad brought us up to be fiercely independent, so that we weren't reliant on anyone. They really believed in earning your income. And then what was really important was serving, making sure you give back. My dad was always helping other people. And so again, that's part of our nature. And I think that's a Caribbean thing as well, that you help your community, that you really serve and that you give back. And I've tried to do that as part of you know, what I've learned and my mum and dad's legacy. So in the pictures on the screen, with my mum sort of sitting in the middle to the photo on the left, I'm the one on the left hand side, so I'm the younger girl on the left hand side and my sister on the right hand side. Some really interesting wallpaper which was big in the 70s. Look, what I've learned and my work ethic absolutely comes from the two of them. It really is about learning my craft, making sure that I'm comfortable, I can look after myself and I can look after my son, and then I give back in terms of a range of things that I do. So last year I started a charity with David Olasoga, with David Lammy, with Dame Vivian Hunt, with Kwame Kweyama, called the Black Equity Organisation, which is focused on looking at how we dismantle systemic racism and structural racism in the UK to make sure that Black people in the UK have the opportunity and have the same equity as everyone else. So that's my way of serving. Previously, I've been a non-exec for the government in the Cabinet Office because I really believe in serving and giving back to people in the UK. And again, through the previous High Commissioner of Barbados, when it came to celebrating 50 years of independence of Barbados, I was part of the committee in the UK, making sure that the Barbadian diaspora here could celebrate those 50 years of independence. So serving is something which is really important. And last slide. Those sort of qualities which absolutely come from that Windrush generation and absolutely come from all of the descendants of the Windrush generation, I teach to my son, because I think it's really important he knows his heritage, he knows where he comes from, and that he has that connection with his roots back in the West Indies. So from when Isaac was 4 months old, he'd go back to Barbados. He does think it's his second home as well. But the values of 2 ears, 1 mouth, learn, earn and serve, really working hard, he absolutely has at his core as well. He doesn't always want to hear it, but he absolutely has at his core.
That's amazing. And I think we've got one more slide, haven't we, actually, which is, yeah, that just bring it all together. Thank you so much for sharing those insights and experience and all of those beautiful photos with us. It's really important, and it's just great to reflect on what impact the Windrush generation has had and continues to have on our society and our culture. So before we move on to the student Q&A, I've got a few follow-up questions. So firstly, just so that the young people listening can get to know you a little bit better, could you tell us a little more about your career journey and your current role?
I'm president of WPP, which is the world's largest marketing communication agency. So one in 3 of the ads that you'll see on TV will be one of our ads. And we do everything from media buying through our amazing media agencies. So buying all of the ads and negotiating with the different media owners, through to PR. So some work that we've done with Marcus Rashford on food hunger, through to creating the ads. So the ads that you actually see and coming up with the ideas. And I got into the advertising industry having studied, I did geography. There was a statistics module in my geography degree, so it had nothing to do with media or advertising at all. So I studied what I loved, and I loved geography, but I got into the industry by looking at my statistics module and interviewing for a role that I saw in the Independent for a media auditor. And a media auditor is somebody that decides that when a campaign's been bought, the agency has reached the right number of people, that they've got the right target audience, that people have seen it at the right number of times for it to have impact. So that's how I sort of made my way into the industry. And look, it was hard to get in because the industry, especially in the early 90s when I started, it was quite a closed industry. It was very much, you had to know somebody in the industry in order to get in, or you had to have studied at a Russell Group university, or you had to go to the right art college where lots of agencies sort of recruited from specific art colleges. I didn't do either of those. So it was really hard to get in. So I had rejection after rejection after rejection when I applied. But the one thing that I absolutely get from my mum and dad is resilience. So to keep going, and failure is not an option. So just to keep going and to pivot and find a different way of getting in.
Well, you started to move there into my next question, which is about how has the heritage and history of the Windrush generation influenced your upbringing and career?
So look, it's as I said, it's definitely resilience is really important, because it wasn't easy for that generation coming to a country which, although it was the mother country because so many of the Caribbean islands were British colonies, it wasn't necessarily welcoming. So the resilience to keep going, and the resilience needed to be able to make a life. My mum and dad were the first Black family to buy a home on the street that I grew up in. So I think absolutely resilience, absolutely being able to get on with different people. I always talk about the UK being a beautiful fruit salad of people, that there's lots of different cultures from lots of different backgrounds that all make up Great Britain. And it's about that beautiful fruit salad and being able to get on with different types of people. So my mum and dad and the Windrush generation. But I also think what's really important is that, saying earlier, that ability to really listen and then learn. So that 2 ears and 1 mouth. And it sounds ridiculous, but attentive listening is a skill set that not everybody has.
That's a great point. And in terms of a lot of messages there, you've obviously internalised from the generation before and are passing on to the next generation. So that moves us into really, what advice would you give to young people from underrepresented or under-resourced backgrounds who aspire to pursue leadership roles in their careers like you have?
I always say that you want to be interesting and interested in what you're doing. So it's so important, because you naturally want to gravitate to interesting people, and that doesn't mean that they have to be an extrovert. You can be an introvert and be really interesting, but really interesting people that have got something about them. So I get people that have studied really, really hard and really focused on their studies, but actually what would make that person more interesting, as well as being exceptional at their studies and being able to show that ability and to learn, is actually people that have tried their hand on other things, that have literally added to their skill set. So I'm really interested when I interview young people, and I don't get to do it enough anymore, as people that show interesting skills beyond showing that they can learn. So when somebody's done a stand-up comedy routine, that is really interesting. That shows me bravery in somebody. If somebody's had a caring role for somebody in their family and have been a carer, that shows me a lot about the individual. So you have to be interested in the job function and in the industry that you want to go into, but you absolutely need to be interesting as well. And curiosity, I cannot underplay enough curiosity, especially in my industry. You need to be curious and asking questions, and you have to really want to know about people, and be really interested and curious about why somebody would choose one brand over another or one product over another. So that curiosity, I think, is really important, because that shows somebody that's adaptive and able to learn as well.
You talked a little earlier about your parents preparing you for sometimes being the first and the only person in the room, but you've also talked about your peer group and people that you work with or that you've set up companies with. I wonder, for the benefit of some of the young people on the call, if you could talk a little bit about some of those people and what they mean to the work that you do, and, you know, other inspirational people you draw from and that perhaps the people on this call might be interested to hear more about.
So I always talk about having cheerleaders. So when you are the first or when you are the only one, it can be lonely. It can be really lonely if there's not a number of you in an organisation or in a group. It can be lonely. So having other people that you can connect with and know to keep you going, because sometimes it's tiring. So having those other people that have shared a similar journey, it may be in a totally different area, is really important, and seeing how they have actually succeeded and how they continue to rise, and more importantly, take others with them as they do it, I find inspiring. So when I'm having challenges and I find things difficult, or if I'm just tired, or I've got a problem that I just don't know how to solve, calling on some of those cheerleaders is really important, especially when they've had a similar journey and faced the same challenges as I have. So I adore the historian David Olusoga, what he has done to be able to educate and make incredibly accessible Black history, I think, is really important, and to also dispel some of the myths around Black people and Black cultures is incredibly important. But he does it in a way which is incredibly accessible. So I adore David. Kwame Kwei-Armah, who is the artistic director of the Young Vic. He's also an actor and a musician. He's a film director as well. His creativity, I find inspiring. If you've ever listened to Kwame give a speech, his spoken word is just poetic. He's amazing. And Kwame being able to articulate a problem and a solution, I think, is amazing. And again, him breaking grounds in terms of what he does in the creative industries in the world of theatre and film, so that more stories are seen and heard, which are from people of my background and community, I think is really important, because cultural representation helps fuel respect and understanding. So it's pioneering for Kwame. And then look, Dame Vivian Hunt, who's ex-McKinsey. She's now at Proton Health as the Chief Operations Officer, but she was a partner at McKinsey. The McKinsey company have done so much research and so many studies as to why diversity matters, which is what so many of us are able to quote to show the value of having, and I prefer to use the term global majority rather than ethnic minority, of having global majority working within teams and organisations, and how it delivers growth and delivers profit. So again, Vivian, with her business head, her no nonsense attitude, I really, really respect.
That's brilliant, thank you. I think we've got one more before we move on to the student Q&A. So if anybody has not yet published their put their question in the Q&A function, then please, now is the time to start doing that. There's also people who came before you, and there will be people who come after. So I'm wondering if there's any particularly prominent figures that you looked up to when you were the age of the young people on this call. May have been fewer, then fortunately they will be able to look to now. But and sort of leading on from that, as a leader and someone in a prominent position, and you've touched on this a little already, what steps do you think we need to take to ensure that the contributions, struggles and stories of those people who may not have been recognised as much are remembered and celebrated for generations to come?
So I'll take the last bit first, just because I think it's really important. And when you look at some of the resources available, so Black History Month UK has a resource pack that can go to schools, which looks at celebrating. So this year's Black History Month is about saluting our sisters is the theme. So about amazing Black women throughout history who have had a massive impact in the UK. And I think those resource packs for schools to be able to use are really important. I really think when it comes to studying our history, my dad used to say a person with no past has no future. So understanding the past and making sure that it's not one-dimensional, so that you really, you know, when you're studying Henry VIII and the Tudors, there's a module that's about the Black Tudors that existed. So even knowing that didn't happen in my time when I was at school, we didn't study the Black Tudors. I know all about the War of the Roses and Henry VIII, but now in my son's generation, he's getting to learn about the Black Tudors that existed. And when he's studying the Industrial Revolution, he's getting to understand about the impact of British colonies and the slave trade, which I didn't get to study. So I think it's really important that we get a full rounded spectrum of history in our schools and that we use those resource packs as well. There's organisations like the Power List, which celebrates 100 people of Black Caribbean or Black African heritage who are doing amazing things in their organisations. And that's across a range of different industry sectors. Every year there's a Power List and it does the top 10, and that Power List magazine in terms of those top 100 and also future leaders is available to schools and resources. So I think you've got to see it to be it. So seeing those amazing people, I think, would be really helpful, because when I was growing up, I didn't have that. I had my immediate family and friends. I didn't have those resources to be able to see, my God, there's amazing people who look like me from my sort of community doing brilliant things. You just didn't hear about it. What we did see, though, when I was sort of, 14 to 18, for years, I thought the newsreader Trevor McDonald I was related to, because my dad was so proud that there was a Black man on TV reading the news, reading the 10 o'clock news, which was, a real anchor vehicle for everything that was happening around the world. And that sense of pride that my dad felt for seeing a Black man reading the news was really inspiring. And I remember when in 1987, when Diane Abbott became the first Black female MP, that my dad said anything is possible in this country. So he really believed that with hard work, anything was possible. So those were the two people who weren't immediate family or friends that we saw, who were more public and more in the public eye doing amazing things. But they were few and far between. There was lots of musicians, there were lots of brilliant footballers, but even the footballers went through lots of adversity in order to make it onto the pitch. But people in sort of the world of politics or accessible on our TV screens, there were a lot fewer.
Thank you. And so we've got a wonderful directory of speakers that showcases some of the progress that's been made. So that's been something we're really proud to have worked on. And great to have you here with us today. So we're going to move now on to the student Q&A with some pre-submitted questions, changing the tone a little bit. But when you were younger, what job did you want to do?
My first love was athletics. So I really wanted to compete for GB. I wanted to be part of Team GB, and some of the people that I was at Reading Athletics Club with went on and did that. So it's humbling when you realise that your ability isn't quite enough. It teaches you about success and failure sport. It really does. So athletics was my first love, and that's what I really wanted to do professionally. And then I remember the very first time I went on a plane to go and visit my dad's brother in Boston, and it was the first and one of the few family holidays that we had, because we just didn't have the money to do family holidays. And at that time, and I can't even believe that this was a thing, you were allowed to smoke on planes. I mean, who'd think about that now? How gross. And I remember going on the plane and being so in love with the whole experience of going on holiday that I wanted to be, I don't know how I got to this, it's a tangent, an air traffic controller. I've got no idea. It's a random tangent, but the idea of being part of people's joy and holidays and helping them get to somewhere safely through being an air traffic controller was sort of where my head was at. And then I realised probably I wouldn't be great at it because it's a lot of real focus and concentration on a screen. And actually, the interaction with people, the creativity that I have wouldn't be played out. But that was what I first wanted to do. Athletics, air traffic controller.
And what's one thing you wish you'd known when you were at the start of your career?
Do you know what? How important it is to travel as part of your job, and travel I mean work globally as part of a role, because for my job in particular, I think it's really, really important that you understand people and understand people from different markets. And when I started doing a global role or a more international role, I got to spend time in other markets, see how the business worked in other markets and cultures in other markets, which I think helped fuel my creativity. So understanding that the world, we're all connected, and that actually we can learn things from other markets that can help us better in what we're doing here. I wish I'd known that earlier. And look, what I got to know later in my career was the value of having somebody that's a ally or a sponsor as part of your career, especially when you're one of few. So if you're one of few people from a Black background in your organisation, having somebody that can talk about what you're capable of and your talent in the rooms that you don't have access to, really important.
Something interesting in what you've just said there as well about the different types of diversity and the value they have. So diversity of thought and perspective, and also that on a global scale.
Yeah.
What do you imagine the future of your industry to look like?
The conversation that's happening in my industry now is AI and how it's going to change it. And there's one extreme, it's going to take everybody's jobs. And the other extreme, that it's going to be avatars of people in ads rather than real people, which is one extreme. Whereas there's another school of thought which just means that actually it will free up time from some of the more mundane tasks, automate them, and allow creativity of humans to go in other areas of the business. So look, I think AI and technology is going to allow us to do things at scale, do things faster that would have taken far longer had it been manual. And actually, I think it's going to be a massive fuel for creativity. So I am embracing AI technology and learning about it and how it's going to impact what we do. And look, the same conversations happened about computers and laptops, where everyone thought that we'd be doing a 4-hour working day because computers were going to be doing everything else. And with the onset of mobile phones, again, it meant that we'll be able to do less. I'm not sure that anybody has done less with mobile phones and computers coming as part of their job.
And so a really important question here from our audience and for our audience, what are some of the key skills and qualities young people will need to have in the world of work in future?
Look, I think you have to embrace technology. So I really do. So I think if you are doing Python coding at school, good. You don't have to be the best at it, but you have to understand it. So I do think understanding about technology is really important. I do think that ability to be able to, I always talk about people being T-shaped, and the people that progress are those that are T-shaped. And by that, I mean that you know a little bit about a lot of things, and you may have one area of expertise, but you know a little bit about a lot of things. So the way that businesses are transforming and becoming more dynamic, and the pandemic has been a catalyst for that, actually, because of all the technology that came to allow us to continue communicating during the pandemic. Knowing a little bit about a lot of things, I think, is really important, but having a core skill set as well. So being open to learning and being able to be adaptive as well, so that you can bring different skills and learnings into different environments, I think is incredibly important. And I always say the best people that, when we recruit at grassroots level, I'm looking for people that I can coach. So I don't need a finished article when people walk in. I just need somebody that can show the ability to learn, and someone that I can coach, rather than somebody that's learned things in different ways and actually we've pivoted and you have to adapt and it's really difficult for them to learn. So I need somebody with a growth mindset rather than a fixed mindset, I think is really important.
And our final question, and feel free to lead this on to any closing remarks really, but is how important is it to work well in a team, and what does that look like?
Look, I always talk about, and again, this is inspired by my son, that I find that I work best in an Avengers team where everybody's got a different superhero power. So I am always looking for that Avengers assemble that I can join, because that's where I get that diversity of thought. That's where I get inspiration for creativity. But not everybody's like that. So I don't think there is one set way of working. I really don't. So I do think that you have to be a good team member. So if your way of working and what's best for you is working on your own and developing things on your own, that's great. But at some point you have to pass that on to other people. So you don't always have to be in a team and part of a team all the time. You can be more introverted and able to do things and create on your own, as long as once you've done that, you're able to then pass the baton on to somebody else. So I really don't think there's one set way of working, especially now in the hybrid world that we're in as well. Sometimes you're in and sometimes you're out. It's just making sure that you deliver, I think, is really important.
What a great note for us to be wrapping up on. There's some brilliant takeaways there for our young people and for us on the call, I think, as well. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to our students about everything we've covered today.